In this episode, Brian and Mike return to continue to talk about their playtesting and aspects of the new Destined game, and the rules guru returns to bring us up to date with the disengagement rule. Welcome to Mythras Matters, Season 1, Episode 24, Disengaging Those Power Rolls. Hello and welcome to May. Now, I have to start off this podcast episode by saying that luckily you can hear me and understand me. At the risk of being attention-seeking, 2 weeks ago I was besieged by facial paralysis. This came on suddenly and I had to visit doctors and consultants to see what was going on. After several tests, they are none the wiser, but assume it was some kind of bilateral Bell's palsy. Anyway, thank you for all the positive words people left for me on my video relating to the paralysis. They really did support me and help me get back to normal as quickly as possible. I hope you can tell that my voice is much better, and the only lasting side effects, as far as we know, is that I am growing a beard and moustache. First time in my 54 years on this planet. As for lasting, we will see how it goes. But at the moment, with so many white and grey hairs, I look like a cross between Santa Claus and Gandalf. You shall not pass! As you might be aware from my intro to the podcast last month, we have a strong international audience for the podcast, and in order to support everyone, I have tried to upload a transcript of the podcast alongside the audio version. I have to say from the onset that this transcript is currently only available for the segments which I write, record and add. As you might be aware, my segments are scripted before recording, so these are easily tidied up and shared. The main interviews will not have transcripts available, sorry. These are not scripted at all, and currently I haven't come up with the time or the software for us to use to do this transcribing cheaply and effectively. I'm keeping my eyes open for possibilities and will keep you all informed. If you have any suggestions, then my email is in the show notes. In the last episode, I shared with you the continents where the podcast is listened to. Well, in order to expand this further and maybe promote the competitive streak in some of you, I thought I would share some more specific areas where the podcast is listened to the most. Now, in the interest of internet and podcast safety, please do not hop over to the audio feedback site and say where you live, etc. But if you are in the leading country or state, then do allow yourself a small glow of achievement. And before I share with you the top countries and all states, see, I'm building up the tension here. I am still waiting to be able to include and share an audience's audio feedback about the podcast with you all. The link is in the show notes, so do pop over to the site and record something nice. It could be anything from positive comments to questions. Someone will have to be the first, so maybe it will be you. Okay, so general country state information first. The podcast is actually listened to in over 310 cities across the world. The country with the highest number of listeners, which is about 5% of the overall listeners, is actually, wait for it, England. Yeah! Next up is the state of Colorado, and third is a town in Lower Saxony, which is in Germany. Sorry, I must admit that I had to look that up. My geography is rubbish. Georgia features in the top 10, as does Ontario, Texas and Wales. And other countries represented are Bavaria, Valencia, Madrid, New South Wales, and Tokyo. Thank you to everyone who listens to the podcast. We really do appreciate all your support. Last episode, we were joined by Brian and Mike as they brought us up to date with the progression of the new game based on the Mythras system called Destined. This allows players to take on the altered egos of superheroes and save the city or planet from villains and other nastiness. We left the conversation at a bit of a cliffhanger last episode. I cut them off just as Mike was about to tell us about his own play testing. If you missed last month's episode, then now would be a good time to pop back and have a listen. If you're still with me, then let's head back to the discussion to see how Mike's play testing went. After, of course, they have both introduced themselves.
My name is Mike Larimore. I'm one of the co-writers of Destined.
And I am Brian Pivick. Hello again. I'm the managing editor of TDM and also the other co-author of Destined.
Has your play testing been good, Mike?
Yeah, actually, it did start that same way, and it's kind of similar to what you were talking about doing for yours. Is I started them, like Brian said, where they were in the middle of the woods, no idea how they got there, no memory of who they were. They were being pursued by these unknown people with all this technology, and at that time they had no powers, so it was purely just their wits to get them out. And then slowly their powers started to manifest. I gave them each a single power, and I let them roll twice on our random table and choose which one they wanted, so they at least had some choice. And it's great to have resistance to sonic damage, but that's not terribly useful in most scenarios. And that's what you roll. And then slowly through the course of the campaign, they've been developing. They've gained new powers. They actually went from street level characters up to the next level. And I wanted them to do that. And over the course of our sessions, we've been slowly bumping them up so we could test all the power levels and see where they're at. And it's interesting, too, because I was really wondering when they got access to more powers, was it going to be a situation where they're just going to start adding new abilities? And some did, but some also just were happy to enhance what they already had by adding more boost to it, kind of going along a theme to make, the super strong, tough guy. Or one character, he got telekinesis and he could change his shape and, look like other people. And it was kind of an interesting mix of powers, but he really ran with it. Or one guy who his only power is luck, but he has such a good time with it. And so using the luck power really has done some amazing stuff and some fun stuff. So it's been a great experience. And I hate to admit it, kind of surprising. You don't want to say this about something you've been working on, but you're kind of surprised how well it works. And the playtesting has really helped that.
It sounds brilliant, and I'm about to start an M-Space campaign, and I'm going to run with a very similar idea, because I don't want the characters to know everything. I don't think they can possibly know everything about the universe. So my idea is to strip it back in the sense that they literally land, they're in their escape pods on a planet, and that's all they know, for whatever reason. So when they encounter new people, new aliens, new corporations, they can actually develop their background along with that as they go along. And I really like this idea. And I think we're definitely going to have random rolls with adjustments. I don't just want a whole load of Aquaman, because not that I have anything against that superhero, but speaking with fish might not be the best power to go with at the beginning. It sounds as if it's a very flexible system. That's what I'm getting at the moment. Would you agree?
That was a goal.
Yeah, I think it's a highly flexible system. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I was kind of surprised, I think I had mentioned this before in one of the other podcasts, one of our initial play tests when we were first working on the system very early on was to create licensed heroes, and that was a suggestion of one of my friends, is the idea that you don't know if it's going to work as a superhero system unless you actually make some actual superheroes, some published superheroes, and see how well it simulates them. And even in thinking about that now, kind of where we're at now versus then, I was thinking of someone like Spider-Man, and the different approaches you could take to his powers. And I could think of, several different ways to do them. And all of them would be correct, but they're completely different approaches to how you could do something, for the one superhero. And, there's a lot of different things hidden in there too. There's lots of tweaks you can make. There's lots of things through the boosts, which really kind of add to the diversity of the powers. So you have the core powers, which give you one fantastic ability, but then the boost can really open that up. So you can really do things, beyond that initial power and really customize it. So two people can have the blast power and be completely different in combat, by the boost they've taken, by the approach they use. And I feel, that's what we were striving to do throughout this process, is to really give you all that flexibility and all those options to make the hero you want.
Yeah, and I would say also, one of the things that we kind of made a conscious idea to avoid at the very beginning was having to roll to use your power. Your power works unless you're unconscious or, dead or something like that. But your power will always work. The boosts are related to power points, which are sort of like magic points in standard Mythras. And you would utilize those boosts to kind of give you an added bonus or ability with your core power. But you're never going to roll to see if your inherent strength is working or is turned on at that point. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, with that, you just find that with those core powers being always on, always working, unless some of the powers you have to consciously use, like your mind, to turn it on, essentially. But you will never have to roll. So with that, there's a great deal of flexibility with what you can do with those powers.
And also we have the limits too, where beyond that you can really affect how your powers function, different from the normal system. If you do want a character that has to put effort into using their enhanced strength, you might take a limit where they have to spend power points to use it, or they are required to have a piece of equipment or a magical item to have their power. And if they're separate from that, then they can no longer use it. And even we discussed that in the Game Master chapter about, really tailoring the power system to where you want it to be. So if you have an idea for a campaign where you don't want the heroes to be able to use their powers, instantaneously, you can add, mandatory limits to everybody, or you can tweak what powers are available. If you just want to play vigilantes and you don't want superpowers, there are a lot of powers in the system that would let you play a martial arts expert or a genius who is very good with equipment and gear. So you can really even have those characters and tailor the power system to what you want it to be for what your story is going to be.
Fantastic. One of the things that we talked about was how the skills and the way the skills work, and to completely the same with the powers as well, how it's providing that narrative, that atmosphere of a superhero game. And I often see very powerful superheroes such as, Batman, or superheroes from the comics, or Spider-Man, or even the villains like Lex Luthor, etc., who have this huge amount of money, there's fortunes. Does Destined adapt for that? Can you have billionaires who are also superheroes?
Absolutely. We have a new system that's based off of kind of like what's seen in Lioness or Leoness. I never know how to pronounce that. Essentially, it's called the allotment system, and there are two separate sections for allotments. There are personal allotments, and then there are organizational allotments. your personal allotments would essentially emulate the kind of money that you have. So you're never going to have to keep track of, I only have, $15 left, so I can't, get a cab back to the superhero, headquarters or anything like that. In many ways, it simplifies the monetary system in Mythras to make it much like the way it is sort of in comic books and hero films, etc. The sort of media around superheroes, they're focused on their money. They're focused on defeating the bad guy, and that's kind of what we wanted to do with that system.
Yeah, and we want to make it flexible enough that you can swap out your gear if need be. You can have different options between different adventures, because it happens, where characters will have specialized equipment for certain things. Batman's a great example of that. Batman has a cave full of different costumes and battle armor and 16 different vehicles and shark repellent spray and whatever else that he has access to. But in a role-playing game, that's really hard to simulate, because you can't just have this massive equipment list. In most cases, if you're using a typical monetary system, there's no way you can make Batman unless the character has infinite money. So the allotments was kind of designed in that respect, is that you have a number of slots, from your organizations, from your personal finances and resources, and that at the beginning of the adventure you can assign them to different kinds of equipment. So if you want to carry a utility belt full of boomerangs and grappling hook launchers, different things like that, you can choose to do that. If you want to devote it towards a vehicle that you want to drive around in or you need for the adventure, you can devote them towards that. And your personal allotments, you're always there. They're always your resources that are available to you, but you also gain them if you're part of an organization. And the organizations could be anything from a Stark Industries or Wayne Enterprises that you have access to, and they might grant you access to technology that you normally couldn't get by your personal allotments because it might be too cost prohibitive, because you might be able to acquire military gear if you make the appropriate checks, but it's going to cost you more resources to do that and more effort. But if you go to your friends at Shield, they might be able to, you might be able to requisition a jet from them. But that also opens up the door for role-playing opportunities where you have to maintain a relationship with the organizations that you're part of, or put some effort into them, or they may call upon you to do them a favor or participate in a mission. So it kind of opens that door as well. There's some effort that needs to be put into that to gain access to what resources they have.
Nice. I mean, that sounds absolutely. I really like the flow, the fluidity of that idea. That we're not counting dollars, for cabs home or evening meals and things like that. So that sounds brilliant. I was just thinking, and as always, I'm sort of like really hyped to play this game. I was just thinking that superhero rule sets or games are probably quite low down on the list. There's a lot of fantasy, then there's all the sci-fi, and then the superheroes down there. And yet we all seem to like comics, and love seeing those films. What do you think there's a reason for that? I was just thinking off the top of my head there.
I think from my perspective, I haven't found a superhero game that really helps you emulate what it is to be a hero. I think that we've done very, very well with Destined, and I think it's the closest that I've come to in my time playing. But I think that's one of the main reasons why, at least from my perspective, why superheroes seem lower on the RPG scale.
Yeah, I also feel like maybe it's a part of it that, in the escapism that we all enjoy for the hobby, that superheroes, even though technically it's a fantastic world, it's still our world in most cases. There's still a lot of the real world problems that creep into it, or real world places. And, when you can escape into a science fiction game or a fantasy game, you're going to a whole different world where there's fantastic things that we don't see here. But that to me is part of the appeal of superhero games, and why I've always been a fan. Even since I think one of my very first games was the original Super World. I think it was the Worlds of Adventure box set, and it's always been important to me because it's still that idea that you are more than you could be in regular life, or you're capable of things that you're not able to do in real life. And really, if you boil it down, every game we play, you're usually a superhero. When you're a fantasy character swinging your +4 magic sword, with your plate mail of etherealness and, wading through hordes of orcs, how's that different than a guy in capes and tights who's, bashing through, dozens of goons to get to the supervillain?
Yeah.
It's just the trappings. It's just, it's the same kind of story, but just with a different flavor.
I completely agree. And I think I also like maybe they could be seen as restrictions, in the sense that if you're a hero, there's certain things you can do and certain things that you shouldn't do. And I'm not saying that nobody will ever do that, but those are boundaries. There's boundaries there. And I think that challenges role playing in the sense of trying to look at a scenario that there's a really easy way to fix it. However, you're a hero, you can't do that, or you can't be seen to do that.
Right. It's interesting that you bring that up, because in my latest playtest, I actually talked to my players about that. I'm like, do you guys want to be, Superman good, or do you guys want to be kind of, gray good? And they opted to be more gray. They said, we would rather be more like Batman, who does some questionable things and, probably suffers from some severe mental distress that is causing him to do these things.
Yeah.
So that's the route they wanted to play. And so far it's been fun. It's been a challenge for them, but it's been a really, really good game. So, you have the ability, and I know we've talked about this in the past, with you, Ian, like you can play a villain if you'd like. You absolutely could create a super villain group and, cause chaos. Absolutely.
You want to play the Punisher or Deadpool, and the idea of killing people is just something that you're perfectly okay with. That's also part of it too. If you want to explore that, or just kind of have fun with it, whatever your group decides and whatever everyone's comfortable with, that's where it is. We discuss that a lot, throughout the player section, the game master section, is that it really is your world, and you need to consider how you want to structure that. Do you want to play something like The Boys, where superheroes are not terribly nice people, even though they have the front of being these, noble, great people? That's perfectly okay too. It's your game. So
has your play testing, Mike, gone down the super or the more vigilante route?
A little of both. One character was very casual with headshots with a firearm for a while, until he realized that he could do far more with his actual powers. But for the most part, I think they've been playing it some gray. There's a little shade of gray in what they do, but ultimately they're trying to do the right thing. And I kind of like that side of it, that they're not really bound to this code, but they're perfectly okay breaking the rules, because, that's part of, in terms of what we're doing with the background setting of that, is that, it's a setting where superheroes, vigilantes, they're sanctioned superheroes, but most of them aren't. So they're still considered to be breaking the law. And the characters have all been in that camp, so they're very careful about what they do, so that they don't draw too much attention themselves. But that means they have to kind of subvert the law sometimes and do some things that are morally questionable. And they've been good about role playing the consequences of that too. So
fantastic. And as you mentioned beforehand, I will take the campaign down the villain route, because I think I really do think, I think it presents the same challenges. That how bad can you be, but also is there that opportunity to save that cat, and what, if there's a bigger organization like a crime boss, how does that reflect on the whole situation? So yeah, I'll definitely be going down that route. So I don't think I really want to just leave the final comments up to you guys. To tempt us for it. I don't know whether or not when will it be here? If you don't know, then that's fine. Anything else that's in it that is going to be fantastic?
Well, we are currently, I believe we have gone through the final phase of editorial. We have made the rules changes as suggested by Pete. All of that has been completed. I think the next step is for the artwork to finally be basically just finalized, and then layout will begin happening. And yeah, I'm hoping this year. I have not heard any definitive dates from Laws yet, but it is definitely looking like this year at this point. So hopefully sooner than later, I hope.
I could say, we have gotten some previews of some of the art, and I'm very pleased. And I think the artists have been doing some fantastic jobs as far as interpreting Brian and I's strange characters and different things that we've created for it. I would say the only thing I would really go into this with too is, I as a fan of Mythras, I think it's important to say, that I really I'm excited to see what people do with it. In terms of integrating it with other games, in terms of taking it directions that we never would have anticipated. We offer a couple of suggestions in the book, but, part of the background of the setting was the idea that, superheroes existed, or some form existed, a long time ago, and they were the basis of legendary heroes and demigods and gods on Earth. And I would love to see people do stories in the Mythic Earth line of Mythras and, really play up that, you could take Daedalus and, make him into a Tony Stark Iron Man type character in ancient Greece, or, I really am excited to see where it goes from here, past just capes and tights. I feel like there's so much that can be done with it, as a rule set, as a power system, and I'm happy. I'll be happy when we get into people's hands and they can break it and mold it and do what they need to do with it to make the stories they want to tell.
It sounds absolutely fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to playing it. Thank you both for coming along and contributing to the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, and it's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much, Ian.
If you're interested in hearing more about Destined, then I chatted to Brian and Mike in episode 6 of the Mythras Matters podcast that has the apt title of Superpowers and Fluttering Capes. I'm definitely looking forward to playing Destined, so I hope we will get a publishing date soon. With this being episode 24, it means that this podcast has been going almost consistently for 2 years. The first episode was published back in April 2019, and I say mostly consistently because I missed an episode. April 2020 was just an apology. Sorry. Remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not drop us an email or message and let us know what you would like to cover. We are always looking for reviews or interviews with people, so if you are interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the various forums I frequent. And also, if you are interested, then remember you can watch my other content on my YouTube channel where I explain the rules of Mythras, including newly published shorter and focused videos. I also post actual play videos and talk about GMing in my series, The Gibbering GM. Likes, subs, and comments are always gratefully received, and I try to reply to all of the comments that you post. And stay tuned right to the end of this podcast because I've got some exciting news coming up. Next up, we are joined by the rules guru again. We often have a discussion which rule the guru should unravel and demystify for us. So if you have any specific rule you would like to feature in this segment, then do let us know. Contact details are in the show notes. This month's rule is one that we actually struggled with a lot when we first started to play. The rule of disengagement. Take it away, Guru.
Hi, I'm Matt Eager of Old Bones Publishing, Matt E on the forums, and our topic for today is disengaging. Remember, I didn't write Mythras. I've just been invited to share my own understanding of how the rules are meant to be used in actual play. One question that has come up a number of times in forum discussions has proved to be rather confusing and sometimes contentious. How can my character get out of close combat? She must be able to just turn and run, right? I used to reply with, no, you can't just retreat from combat at will, so you had better think about it hard before jumping into any fight, because once involved, you might find yourself unable to escape. But that didn't always go over so well. Following a few long exchanges on this, I've returned to the rulebook and thought about the question a bit more, and now I believe I have a better, clearer answer. The trouble here, I think, is mainly due to the way the rules are laid out in the book. The rules for retreating from close combat, also known as withdrawing, are on page 107 of the latest edition of the core Mythras book. Laws and Pete speaketh. Withdrawing from a fight means that the character extricates himself from close combat weapon range. Withdrawing is automatic when using the withdraw special effect. Otherwise, a character must attempt to break free by use of the change range or outmaneuver combat actions, in which case the opponents may resist. Once he has disengaged himself, the withdrawing character may on his next turn, for the cost of an action point, flee the battle entirely or choose from some other options. The withdraw special effect is described on page 101, but you don't need to win a special effect to retreat. The outmaneuver action is described on pages 92 and 104, but applies only to avoiding a group of opponents, not when fighting one-on-one. In that case, the usual one in close combat, the change range proactive action is used. This is described briefly on page 91, but the crucial exposition is actually where we began on page 107 in the section immediately before withdrawing. I think this is the first piece of the trouble that some folks have with these rules. To withdraw, use change range. To understand change range, in this context, refer to opening range. Yet the text for opening range says, opening range works in the same way as closing range, but obviously in reverse. Thus, we counterintuitively end up needing to learn the rules for closing range. On top of this confusing series of pointers to other rules, the sections on opening and closing range follow sections on fighting at the longer and shorter reach, all tucked under the larger heading of weapon reach, closing and opening range. The thing is, those rules for weapon reach are described as optional. Knowing what to do when a character wants to quit a fight, however, cannot be considered optional. It's a key part of RPG combat that's bound to come up before long. This is the second piece of the trouble in reading the rules as written. The third and probably largest piece of the trouble, though, is having to reverse the procedure for closing range rather than just reading an explicit procedure for opening range. Let's go through that reversal now. When using the change range combat action to attempt to open range and withdraw from melee, the character's opponent has two options. That's important. The character chooses to try to retreat using change range, but the opponent dictates what dice roll will be made in response. Option 1. The opponent may stick with the character to stay engaged. The combatants make an opposed roll of evade. If the character wins, then she opens the range to a desired distance and then may proceed to withdraw on her next turn. If the opponent wins, then the existing range is maintained. Note, though, that this does not necessarily mean that they stand still. There could be some incidental movement around the battlefield that nonetheless leaves the combatants engaged as before. These people aren't statues. Combat's dynamic. Option 2. The opponent may attack the retreating character, making an opposed roll of combat style versus the character's evade. If the opponent wins, then the character is hit as in combat, and any difference in level of success yields special effects as usual. Whether or not the blow lands, the retreating character opens the distance and is free from engagement. It's only a question of how painful the process is. This second option is Mythras' version of the free shot at a retreating enemy's back that is familiar from other rule sets, especially those from the old school. Above all else, there's an important idea to keep in mind. If the opponent has no action points left, or simply chooses not to spend an action point to resist the character's departure, then the attempt to open range automatically succeeds, period. No dice rolls, no drama. To put it another way, what are the possible situations in close combat? If both combatants elect to keep fighting, then the rules for withdrawing do not apply. If both combatants elect to stop fighting, then the rules for withdrawing do not apply. Combat simply ceases and people may move freely. The case where one combatant wants to withdraw and the other does not resist is just a rephrased version of this one. If one combatant elects to retreat from fighting but the other does not, then the rules for withdrawing apply. This is the only situation in which we use the rules for withdrawing, the one where the combatants don't want the same thing. So, to sum up, if one combatant wants to retreat from fighting but the other does not, then the rules for withdrawing apply. The retreating character may use the change range action to attempt to disengage from close combat and then to withdraw completely on her next turn. The opponent decides which sort of opposed roll will be used, evade versus evade or combat style versus evade. In the first case, the retreat may fail, leaving the combatant still engaged, but in the second case, the retreating character definitely does disengage, though she may suffer a blow in the process. Well, that wraps up my time for today. I hope this brief discussion of the rules for disengaging has been helpful. My concluding advice is understand these rules before your character enters the fray. Game on!
I have to say that we once had a very, 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 very long fight between the party and a giant caterpillar, where we tried to use the disengage rule for the caterpillar to no avail. The combat progressed and both the caterpillar and the party failed endurance rolls and were slowly succumbing to fatigue. I think in the end everyone just collapsed on the floor from exhaustion. Now I take a different approach. As the combat is coming to an end, we just complete the narrative and say that the people can be captured or killed. Before I start the end segment for this episode, I would like to give a personal plug and more self-promotion. We, as in myself, Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Pickles, Longshanks, EPG and Medivac the Healing Hoover, have decided to blast off into space. No, we have not booked tickets on the first civilian flight to Mars. We have decided to alternate our campaign between Mythras, the fantasy setting, and M-Space, the sci-fi setting. We will be playing a whole adventure in one setting before moving to the other for another adventure. We will be streaming these live as usual on Twitch, and the recordings will be available on YouTube. This Saturday, we will be making up characters, so if you would like to see M-Space in action, then do make a note of the time, 1900 hours, British Summer Time on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/inwils. Make a note of it, and it would be lovely to see you. And if you're interested in M-Space as a rule set or setting, then do have a listen to episode 17 of this podcast, when I was joined by Clarence and Scott as the galactic creators of the game. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Next month is currently a complete mystery, but I'm sure the content will be excellent once I find it and record it. And don't forget that the next short rule video on my YouTube channel will be on bartering and haggling. Sorry for the delay about this. It was all because of the issues with my face. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all in June. Until then, I hope all your opposed rolls succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.